Well, good morning, church. One person. Woo. Thank you. I don't know who said that, but I love you. My name is Mike, if you didn't know that. I am one of the leaders here at the church. And hey, if this is your first time with us, we are pumped you're in the room. Especially if this is your first time in church in a while, maybe first time in church ever. We are ecstatic for you because you're part of the reason why we do church the way that we do it. Honestly, just engage with people just like you, being a seeker or skeptic. Maybe you're kind of spiritual but don't know much about this Christianity thing. It doesn't matter wherever you're at. We're loving that you're in the room because we just want everybody and all people to ultimately know about the love and the mercy, the grace and the justice of our God, His great love to forgive us of sin and lead us to freedom. That we are not Christians who are praying that we can escape the world, but actually we're praying the prayer of Jesus, that heaven would come here, that God would do good work here. And we just want everybody to know the life, the light, the joy of what Jesus can bring. And so we're pumped that you're here today, and especially because this is our third week in a series that we're calling Selfless. It's all about marriage and relationships and things like that. And it's kind of meant to have the feel of what we in church sometimes call like marriage prep or a pre-marriage course, where we talk about some deep conversation, try to get real practical into the weeds of some of the stuff, try to, even if you've ever done a pre-marriage thing, a really good one, almost kind of tries to elicit fights. Right? Because you can talk about real stuff that maybe you haven't talked about before. And today we're going to dig into a little bit more of that. We're going to start to kind of get into the weeds of a little bit of stuff. And so if you have a Bible, if you want to open up to the book of Song of Songs, chapter 2, I know I mentioned the first week that that's quite an erotic book, which it is, by the way. It is an erotic love poem in the Bible. But you didn't know that. But it's God's idea, so I'm just saying. There, or Proverbs 16. You can go to one of those two places. I'm going to read these two portions of Scripture first. The first one is from Song of Songs. It's going to be kind of our key jumping off point. And it says this, starting in verse 15. It says this, catch the foxes. Or technically in the Hebrew, it could mean jackals. Catch the canine critters for us. These little foxes that will spoil the vineyards. For our vineyards are in blossom. They're blooming. They're fruitful. And then in the book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 24, says this. Gracious words or gracious speech, grace-filled language are like honeycomb. They're sweetness to the body, or sweetness to the soul, and health to the body. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word today. I pray that you would just speak clearly and deeply through me. Holy Spirit, would you just use the gifts that you've given me for your glory and the good of this church and use them any way that you want to. God, we want to submit our hearts and in my mind to you right now. If there's anything in my heart that's not from you for our church today, would you just quiet it in me, God? We only want what you want, nothing more, nothing less. And I pray that we'll stay on pace with you today. God, would your kingdom come and would your will be done here as it is in heaven. Amen. Have you ever got your, signals crossed before with somebody? You know what I mean? Like when Emmett and I first got married, one of the things we had to learn real quick is that when we would say certain things to each other, they meant different things to one another, right? Like, for example, when my wife, when we were first married, would say things like, hey, I would like to cuddle. What that meant to her and what that meant to me were wildly different. Right? Like they ended off very differently. They started very much the same, but where it went was worlds apart because for her, a good cuddle session, a nice hot tea, and a movie, that was great. For me, right, cuddling leads to kissing, and kissing obviously leads to a deep theological conversation, right? I don't know what you're thinking, right? No, I'm just kidding, right? The only theology I was thinking about is making songs come to life. You know what I'm saying? But the point would be this, is we would get all weird and get upset with each other and all this like unspoken expectations and ultimately miscommunication would just cause some issues. So we had to learn how to manage that with each other and learn each other and love each other in this way. And I really want to begin to dig into actually those very things today on the realm of expectation and communication. Because in what we read in Song of Songs today, yes, Song of Songs, as I mentioned, is this erotic love poem. It's these married people going over their sort of loving history and expressing themselves. And like, if you get into the weeds of that thing, it is It is a thing, right? But in the midst of all that hormone and romance and whatever, there's a few really good warnings that we actually learn from the portion of Scripture. And one of them is do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires, right? There's this refrain of understanding that with fire, for example, you can barbecue a nice steak or burn a house down, right? Depending how you wield that thing, right? It's the same thing with love. Don't arouse it too early. Don't treat it lightly. But the other warning is what we read today in chapter 2, where they say, catch these foxes. Catch these foxes that want to come in and ruin our vineyard, which in that case is their love, their relationship, which it says is in blossom. It's meant to flourish and grow and become fruitful, right? And so catch these little critters, these little things that try to sneak in under the fences, through the cracks in the wall that we have not repaired, that come in and ultimately eat the fruit of our vine, eat and steal the fruitfulness of our marriage, because that's the goal, right? That marriages are flourishing and fruitful, lovers, friends, partners, in the mission of God, for the glory of God, for the good of each other, that we are fully becoming more alive in our relationships together, that we want to see our marriages last 50, 65 years, living, laughing, loving Jesus together, right? Not bitter, bored, and glad they're dead. That's not what we're after, right? Yes? Hopefully, right? And here's the thing. You don't just drift into that. That's not accidental, right? You don't just happen to wake up being 75 and just have an amazing marriage. No. There's actually some activity that goes into that. There's some work that gets done, much like your soul, right? We talk about that a lot here today, that we live from the health of our soul, that there's some work we got to do to make ourselves get healthy in the grace of God. Because at the end of the day, by the way, right, if you want to test your marriage, see how healthy it is, you need to actually test yourself, right? Because you live as a spouse from the health of your soul. So if everything's going wrong inside and getting all icky and whatever, that's going to leak out into your marriage, which is why in every sermon series on marriage, we always come back to this fundamental point. You got to trust Jesus. You have to go back to submitting your heart to Him, because if you are a submitted spouse, you will become a good one, right? You may not start as a good one, but you are going to get there. And I can admit this to you today in almost in an embarrassing fashion, that when I am so much closer to Jesus, I am a better spouse, better human being. I just want to admit that, right? In fact, it's almost embarrassing to me because I've been a pastor the whole time my wife and I have been married. And I would get up and do these sermon series about how to be a good husband and good wife and do all this stuff. Well, I kind of sucked, to be real, right? And the thing about it is the more that God broke my heart down and led me into a relationship with Him that was deeper than just knowledge, understanding, the better spouse I have become. And I just want to invite people into that today. What I'm saying is not just stuff, it's real. If you find Jesus, you will find out how to be a good spouse. In fact, there's times in our marriage where Emily, she will say to me, you need to go pray right now. Why? Because she's like, essentially, you got to go spend some time with the King of Peace. You got to go spend some time with the gracious and merciful God so you can come back and act like Him. And it's true, I need it. I can admit that straight up, that the closer I've been with Jesus, right, the closer I am to actually a good husband that I want to be. Because as we said a couple weeks ago, God actually wants to partner with you into making you into the kind of spouse your heart desires you to be. He wants to see you fully alive and heal the wounds that cause these issues. And if we're willing to do some work, right, we work out what God has worked in. I know we often don't like the idea of work, but grace for us, right, is a position that is not entitled, but puts effort into what God wants to do, and so that God can bless it, right? Grace is not opposed to effort, just opposed to earning. The same is true of your marriage. There is some work to be done in your marriage. If you want to drift, you will drift towards apathy and death, not life and flourishing. And one of the works that God needs to grace is this thing that we can call catching the foxes. Doing the work of assessment and finding those places of breakdown and doing some stuff to actually fix those things, to learn and to ultimately grow together. And so I want to deal with those two kind of foxes. In fact, the rest of the series really is just an extension of this principle. How do we catch some of these major foxes, we'll call them, that trying to sneak into a marriage? And so today, as I mentioned, it's going to be two major ones that are ultimately tied together, right? And it's this: communication and expectations. Communication and expectations. Or I should say, maybe more plainly, unspoken expectation and unloving communication. Those kind of two things together, all right? Those are kind of where we're going here today. And here's the thing, right? When it comes to this world of expectation, this is one of those foxes we kind of open the gate for and just let walk right in, to be honest. It's one of those ones that we don't think about nearly enough, but what happens is this. When we live in the world of unspoken expectation over our spouse, right, what begins to happen over time is a thing called disappointment, right? Because if it's unspoken, and they don't even know I'm holding them accountable to something that I've never said out loud, but they disappoint me because they don't ultimately fulfill what I expected them to do, I live in disappointment. And here's the thing, with enough disappointment comes disillusionment. And with enough disillusionment comes division. And with enough division comes bitterness. And with enough bitterness, you get the death of a relationship. Right? So what ends as death ultimately can begin in disappointment. Right? And I know I've taken maybe a 10, 15-year thing and struck it down to 2 sentences, but the principle remains the same. If I continually live in a world of assumption and unspoken expectation, I'm setting my spouse up to hurt me. And that's actually on you, not on them. Right? If you're not going to communicate those things to them and then you judge them on a test they don't know they're taking, that's just unfair, right? It's not going to go well, right? And as we all know, if you assume, I'm not going to say it because it's going online. But point being is you begin living in this world, right? And so if you've ever said this to your spouse, like I thought you were just going to. I assumed you would have known. You should know what I want. Did you marry a mind reader? Because I sure didn't, and I'm definitely not one, right? But yet somehow we assume that our spouses should just know everything about what's going on in our brains. And it's just not great, right? And the problem with expectation is it also can be built into the mundane things of life. Like this is a story that I'm not very proud of, but I'm going to share it with you guys because it, I think, illustrates the point well, is that when Emma and I first got married, I got a job at a church. So I was working in an office all day, and she was a full-time photographer, so she did editing at home. She kind of worked and lived from home. But if you know anything about my wife, you also know that like her level of cleaning is like above good and great and excellent. It's like borderline, maybe diagnosable. I'm just kidding, kind of. But she keeps the house real clean. She's super serious about that, right? And so what happened when we first got married, right, I'd go off to work, and she'd be there editing, and then during her times off, right, where we kind of agreed that I'd do all the cooking, she'd do all the cleaning, it's kind of how we divided all the labor, that she would do laundry, and she would do the dishes, and she'd have everything done. The bathroom would be clean and immaculate. It would be amazing. And I'd come home, and the house would look awesome. And I'd be like, this is great. And then she got pregnant. Right? And if you know anything about pregnancy, you do know that at least the first few weeks, or if you're my wife, the first 3 months, she is 24/7 sick. Like 24/7. I'm not even exaggerating, right? And so I start coming home, and the dishes ain't done. And the laundry's not done. And I want to have compassion for my wife, obviously. But what happened is I began to live in this world of expectation that she should just be doing this stuff. And the moment the expectation broke down, I didn't respond with compassion. I responded with entitlement. I got disappointed in her, right? It's embarrassing because I could grow up and do my own dishes. But like you begin to grow into this way. And I know that's kind of like a longer story, but the innocuous things of the everyday life of marriage, that's what begins to happen. Hey, I thought you were going to do the dishes today. Hey, I thought you were going to pick up the eggs. I thought you were getting Charlie from school, right? Hopefully you didn't forget him, obviously, right? Actually, you know what's funny is the other day, we were out for dinner, and he was so quiet, and Emily took the other 2 kids to the car, and I literally was like having a panic attack, worried about forgetting him. Because he was just so quiet. I was like, I'm going to forget this kid. And so I just kept reminding myself that I have a 3rd kid. Because he's so nice and easy, like we honestly forget that sometimes he's there. Right? I know that sounds bad, but if you get a kid, like you realize that. You're like, he just never cries. It's great. Right? Anyways, point being, is when you live in this world of unspoken expectation, you begin to just kind of, you begin ultimately, to be honest, to become an entitled brat. Can I just say that? That's what that is. Right? I expect that everything, especially my marriage, is supposed to just serve me and do what I want. And that's the problem, right? Is a marriage, yes, is meant to be full of servant-hearted and honor, but not entitled brats. Like that is not how you have a good marriage. And the problem with that is it begins to show you ultimately how ungrateful you are. And that's the bigger issue. That's the bigger issue. Is entitlement, which is an unspoken expectation, really is the evidence of a lack of gratitude, right? And so how do we fix this unspoken expectation? You start getting thankful, right? So the first thing you do is stop being entitled, right? Stop believing everything's about you, because that's a weird dynamic in marriage as well. If you are an entitled spouse, you kind of act like a master and a servant. Which, tell me how flourishing is going to come from that. It's not, right? If you're always judging them on a test that they don't know they're taking, how is that going to bring unity? It will not. So number one, don't be entitled. Number two is be grateful, which means this. You literally start saying thank you to your spouse. This is going to be one of the most practical things that you can do today. It changed even how I appreciate my wife, is I just say thank you to her for the things she does. Revolutionary. I understand that. But what hit me was I was going out with a pastor friend of mine who's a little older than me. Well, I'd say he's double my age. And he was talking to me about marriage and asked me all this stuff. And he asked me this question. He said, Mike, when was the last time you said thank you to Emily for doing your underwear? And what was embarrassing is I couldn't give him an answer. Right? Like, this woman does my dirty laundry for me, and I don't have the decency to say, thank you for that. But how many of our spouses in the room today, can we be real, live in a culture of thanksgiving with each other? Or you just assume that of course you're going to fix me a meal. Of course you're going to clean that, right? And here's the thing. You might say, well, love doesn't need a thank you. Sure, but honor is never a bad thing, right? It allows you to not become entitled. It allows you to walk in a place of actual humility. Hey, I know you don't have to do this for me, but I want to honor the fact that you're willing to be a servant to me right now, so thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Like, that is such a powerful change, because it puts you in a place where I can be humble enough to honor my wife, honor my spouse for the things they just do. And how can you be entitled if you're thankful? You can't. You can't. In fact, I would even argue that entitlement is the opposite of thanksgiving. Right? And if we just said, remember before, that grace does not oppose effort but earning, which ultimately is an entitled spirit, then actually the evidence of my grace, of my life graced by Jesus, is that I'm thankful a lot. So, put this together, right? If you want to cause division and pain and disunity in your marriage, don't tell them you're judging them all the time. Right? Now, what I have said up to this point is don't live in unspoken expectation. Make sure that you're not being entitled. Say thank you a lot. And number three is this: over-communicate your desires. Right? Over-communicate. Like clarity, right, can actually promote unity. Because we both know what we want. We both know what's expected. Like, I don't know how many times I have ruined the potential of a very exciting night for myself, right? By just living in this world of assumption. And then judging Emily based on the calendar and the schedule I had in my mind for how this night was supposed to go, right? And just ruining it because I'm getting all upset and messed up. And if I just would have stopped and would have been, hey, babe, how do you envision tonight moving forward? In fact, and this is going to be maybe too much information, but I actually do that now all the time. If there's like a free night, I'm like, babe, how do you envision tonight going? Like, I need to check my heart right now, right? Because I don't want to get excited if, I'm always excited to be with you, babe. But like, I just want to make sure, right, that and so I overspeak because I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. That's never a problem unless you suck at communication. Then over-communication is horrible. Right? Because you're just doing it really poorly. Which leads me to my second point, the fox of unloving communication. Because I would argue, and I would think studies back me up on this, that outside of the number one issue of a marriage breakdown, which is called selfishness, generally speaking, right? Outside of the realm of trauma and woundedness, it's self. Because even adultery, by the way, is selfish. Right? All the things that are selfishness. Actually, the number two one is actually the umbrella one of communication. Because whether it's money, whether it's sex, whether it's expectations in life, when communication breaks down, the marriage is beginning to break down. Because if you can't talk about it and also deal with this stuff, then how do you actually grow unity together? Because half of intimacy is not just experience, it's communication. We actually have to talk and open each other up and invite each other into the world that I'm currently occupying. And so here's the thing that we have to understand, right? Is that poor communication is not just a skill issue, it actually is a sin issue. It's sinful. Why? Because I'm convinced, based on what we're going to read in the Bible, right, that communication is an act of love at its core. See, in one of the Proverbs, right, we read that in the tongue there's the power of life and death, right? Life and death, which is not some like name it, claim it, just speak it. Like it's not what it's about. What it's about is saying this: you can build up or destroy based on how you talk. That you can encourage or devour. That you can make someone feel like $100 or destroy them, right? And how you speak, right? And then in Ephesians 4, Paul says that our speech should always be gracious and beneficial for the hearer. Good for them, right? In Proverbs 16, which we read earlier, right, it says that a gracious word, right, gracious communication, grace-filled talk is sweetness to the soul and even health to the body. That's how powerful speech can be. Or one of those kind of like marriage 101 verses is Proverbs 12:18. I don't have it on the screen, sorry about that. But it says this, that there is one whose rash words are like sword thrusts, whose reactionary words, whose anger-filled words, whose wound-centered words are actual sword thrusts to the soul of my spouse. But then it finishes with this, but the words of the wise, the tongue of the wise, the communication of the wise can bring healing. Like if our married people in the room today just thought on that verse, I can almost guarantee, there'd be better communication in the room. Or my words can be like swords to them. Because here, I'm going to pick this up in week 5 when we talk about conflict, but some of us in this room, you have weaponized your words against your spouse. You've said things that you know will be like sword thrusts, right? And that's just not bad marriage. That is evil, right? The malicious intent to wound, evil. And we do that to people we've chosen to love forever? Like there is some issues here that we need to deal with, right? And so what we have here is that communication, when it's done as an act of love, from Ephesians 4, is this. It is the goal of a loving communicator to ultimately not just be heard, but have my message understood by them. That my goal is to speak in a way, communicate in a way, that the recipient of my message, my spouse in this case, actually can receive what I want them to receive and the way I want them to receive it in the time and appropriate place for it. It's an act of love, of saying it's not about what I want to say, but how they're going to hear it. It's not what I want to do, it's how they're going to receive this. To be a great communicator is to selflessly do the work of loving that person enough to speak well. Speak well. Because that can produce all the things we ultimately want it to do. So, here's the problem. When this begins to break down, right, gaps in communication happen where we don't talk as well as we should, or we say things that we shouldn't say. Here's what happens that I find is both just a human problem, and this affects not just marriage, but I think just relationships in general, is we often, whenever there's a gap of trust built up, we always fill it with the worst possible scenarios. Have you noticed that? Right? I hardly ever fill a gap of communication or a gap of trust with the benefit of the doubt. But we should, by the way, because we're grace-filled people, are we not? Right? But when communication breaks down and I can't talk and we can't enter each other's world, trust breaks down. And when trust breaks down from week 1, what do we remember? That we break down vulnerability. And when vulnerability breaks down, we break down intimacy. And when intimacy breaks down, we break down unity. And when unity breaks down, how do you be one flesh? And you can trace it all the way back to this place. And so what I want to do today for our remaining time is pretty simple. Like I said, this is going to be one of those kind of in-the-weeds messages where it's going to deal with some real stuff. And it really is going to be this. I want to give us ultimately 5 filters for our face. 5 filters to think about before you speak that can hopefully produce some really good communication in our marriages so we can produce intimacy, so we can do the hard work of this thing called love. Oh, and by the way, if you're not married, then these 5 things do matter to you today, too, because it's just called good wisdom. All right? So the 5 things, hopefully you've heard these before, they're not going to be new, are this: what, why, when, where, and how. Going back to grade 1, comprehension class. Are you ready for the EQAO? Right? Wasn't there always like a comprehension component where you had to answer all those questions on that test, I think, right? EQAO for non-Ontario people is a dumb test we'd had to take. Anyways, number 1, what? The filter of what? Simple. Is what I'm about to say, the content of my words, truthful and helpful? Truthful and helpful. We are people who deal with trust, right? And we deal with trust by speaking in truth. Truth must be the starting place for us, not just because our God is truth, and Jesus says he is the way, the truth, and the life, and because he's come to reveal the truth, and truth is the corresponds to reality, which means we can be better living in the light of God, and it comes from his nature. All that's true, but also, you can't actually build unity on lies, right? You can't. Maybe you can sustain in a moment a false sense of superficial unity because we didn't deal with a real issue, but false pretense will never produce unity in the long term, right? In fact, I would put it like this, that deception and division are best friends. They love each other, and they live together, right? And so if we want to be people who speak well, we have to speak that which is true. Now, here's what this brings up an issue for a lot of us in the room. If you feel that you cannot be truthful or fully honest with your spouse, why? Why? Because how can you build intimacy if you cannot have honesty? It just can't be there. So the question is why? Is it because you have a shame issue around this topic? Because you have fear around it or guilt around it? Is it because you believe that if they hear what you have to say, they're going to respond in certain ways and there's a communication breakdown that way? Right? I don't have an answer for you. I need you to figure it out. Right? If you feel like I can't be honest with my spouse, the question is why? I got to diagnose that thing. I got to figure out why there's a breakdown of trust here. If it simply is because we've been 15 years into this marriage and I don't trust my spouse anymore, at least diagnose it so we can begin to deal with it. Honesty has to be the bedrock of this. Right? We're saying that which is truthful, but not just truthful, helpful. So is what I'm about to say true and good for them? So Paul says in Ephesians 4, right, that it's beneficial to the hearer. I want them to grow, to flourish. I want our relationship to protect the intimacy to grow. So is it what I'm about to say, not just true, just a true thing, but also helpful to the moment? Is it good for the relationship to hear what I'm about to say? Right? And I think if our spouses would just ask those two questions, we probably wouldn't say as much as we say. Can we just be real? Right? Is the thing I'm about to say not exaggerated, not underplayed, not trying to make a point, just trying to be truthful and helpful? Right? Because that even includes things that are corrective, of course. Right? Because if it's true that we need to talk about this hard issue, then we've got to deal with that. But it's not exaggerating the hard issue. It's not making more of the wound than actually is there. It's not trying to make them out to be a worse person that I chose to marry. Right? Truthful and ultimately helpful. But from that place, the next filter is why. Why do you want to say what you're about to say? What's the heart behind it? Because you can weaponize truth. Do you know that? I can take a thing that is true and use it to destroy another human being by ultimately my motivation behind it. Am I speaking right now to make a point, to prove that I'm right, to show you that you're wrong, because I'm angry, because I'm hurt, because I'm wounded? Is that the reason why I want to speak right now? Right? Because the reason for our speech should always be to love them, to flourish us, to promote unity together. That I need to check my heart at all times and ask myself the question, am I about to say this because I want to show that I'm good and right and a good spouse, or because I actually want to help? Why do you speak? Why do you open your mouth? Why do you let words cross your lips? Because did you know Jesus says in Matthew that you'll be held accountable for every single idle word you speak? Just let that one sit for a second. God of all things is going to hold you accountable for every word you let cross your lips. How many of us want to stand before him right now? Right? Praise be to him that there's this thing called grace that I need every day. But every idle word. Because as a Christian, right, we should not be reacting but responding. Right? We should be checking our heart all the time. In fact, I want you to hear this. Right? The goal of Jesus for your life is not just to get you to act like him, but react. He wants to actually change the impulses of your soul, heal the wounds that often lash out. That's the aim of God, right? Not just behavior, but belief. Not just action, but reaction. And how much of us in our marriages, to be honest, would be healed if we would just stop reacting like one with rash words who's our sword thrusts? Because how many know a lot of the sword thrusting words come out of a reactive place, which usually is a wounded place. Right? You hit something that triggers me. Right? You made me feel dumb. You made me feel fearful. So I'm going to react to you. And we're going to deal with more reactions in our conflict sermon in a couple weeks. But just the motivation question of why are you saying what you say? Check your heart, friends. I don't care if you're single or dating, whatever. Why are you saying what you're saying? Is it to build up or to destroy? Are you weaponizing truth? Number 3 is actually combined. It's when and where together. When and where together. Because the goal of communication, as I said, is to allow the other person to receive the message that I want to communicate. So as a good communicator, it is my job in a marriage to set up the environment for my spouse to receive the message I want her to receive, right? And so I got to figure out through appropriateness and wisdom, is right now the right time to have this conversation? Is right now the right place? Is this the right medium? Look, there's a couple proverbs in the book of Proverbs that says, answer a fool and he will hate you. And the next one, literally, the next one is answer a fool and he will grow in wisdom, right? It's like they're contradictory, are they not? No, the difference is timing, knowing when and how to approach a situation. The same is true of a marriage. I'm just going to say this, okay? Allowing a deep discussion to happen at Christmas dinner in a month from now, which is already awkward because Uncle Tom's going on some weird political conspiracy theory, right? It's not the appropriate place to just open up your heart to your spouse, right? Like, turkey in, I hate our sex life. That's not the right place for that, right? Like, it's not appropriate, right? And I know that's probably an extreme example, but like, just understand there's appropriateness. Also timing. Like midnight, not a great time to have a big discussion, right? Like, I used to be like this, and again, I'll deal with this more in the fighting sermon, but I used to believe, right, that not going to bed angry meant that we fight it out until we go to sleep, right? And so I'd have these big discussions at like midnight. And my wife would be like, you need to chill, go to bed and sleep on it. And I would be like, you don't love us. You're just running away, right? Which was clearly I was a brilliant spouse, right? And what she was doing is protecting us from me. Because at midnight, I ain't saying good things, right? It's just not going to go well. Because if you know me, you know that I tend to be a word guy. I speak and can sometimes use really big words to make myself feel smarter and you feel dumb. And all that comes out at midnight, I'll tell you that much, right? Not the great space. So time, or how about this? Probably not on the way to church. Oh, I got a reaction to that one, right? You know it. So some of you were the kids in the back of the van hearing your parents argue and then get out and smile at church. Oh, I'm so wonderful. You're a liar, Mom, right? But that's what happens, right? Not appropriate, right? Can it, table it. Hey, babe, can we talk about this later? Like on the way home from church, great place. Because God has met you. You've been convicted by an amazing sermon by Pastor Mike, right? That's the time, right? To talk about it, right? But not before church, right? Or how about this one? The medium of communication. I know my generation, and maybe this is a generational thing, loves text messages, right? Loves the DMs, right? But like, lowest form of communication for relationships. Like a text message can contain information and like checking in, like, hey, babe, 5 minutes away. Hey, did you get the eggs? That stuff. Or like a kissy face emoji, right? So we know what's up. That's allowed, right? That's wisdom. Beyond that, it's all just stupidity. Like when Emily and I first got married, we would have full-on 8-hour, full-day fights over text messages, right? That's stupid. Like there's no other way to put it, right? It's not necessarily evil. It's just stupid, right? Why would we do that? Because I don't get context. I don't get face. I don't get expression. I don't get tone. I don't get communication. I just have some words that when I'm angry, I'm clearly going to read the worst motivations into her heart because I forget how wonderful she is because I'm angry and selfish, and that's what happens. And if you are here today and you're one of those couples that fight still over text message, stop. Like, save yourself a couple years of health and just stop. Babe, we can't talk about this right now. We'll call each other at lunch. You know, there's a beautiful thing called FaceTime or Skype where you can see each other now. Isn't that beautiful? Like, we can do that, right? I obviously believe face-to-face is the best one, clearly, because of all the nuance of communication. But the point I'm trying to make is this, is there's wisdom to know how, right? Which medium is appropriate for this communication to have for my spouse right now. And I feel like we would fix some problems if we just choose not to text certain things, right? And by the way, dating people, if you're going to break up with someone over a text message, you weren't mature enough to date in the first place. Like, here's the thing, okay? If some young punk, when my daughter's 25, texts her, right, and says, "You're so pretty. I would love to go out with you," okay? I'm going to train my little girl that if she likes him, if she doesn't like him, it's like buzz off, bro. But like if she likes him, right, to answer this question, to answer with this, yes, I would love to date you when you're brave enough to say it to my face. Period. Send. Like if you're mature enough to kiss her, you can talk to her. I'm just gonna put it out there, gentlemen. Right? I was the worst for this. I was so smooth on MSN Messenger, but then I did it all. I had all the lines, but then you put me in front of Emily. I'm like, hey, right? It's like, anyways, right? Point being, face to face, best kind. Last one is the how. How. So we have what is the content, right? Why is my motivation, right? When and where is the atmosphere, the place, the timing of this, right? And lastly is the how. And this kind of comes on two levels, tone and language. Tone and language. This is all about interpreting myself to the language of my spouse. Because I don't know if you realize this when you guys got married, but you're different people, right? Like, and we talked about differences last week on the biggest level, but just on the personality level, right? Like we process different, we think different, we have different language for certain things. Different things trigger us and set us off, right? And as a good, wise spouse, my job is to learn the language of my spouse so I can speak it, right? Like Emily and I, she is way more kind of what I would say creative and like stereotypically artsy and flowery and whatnot. I'm a little more analytical, right? And so when we talk to each other and I have a thing to communicate, if I try to communicate in a way that makes sense to me, I'm being selfish, right? Like I hear this from a lot of young guys a lot. Like it made sense to me, she just didn't get it. Yes, because you're not talking like a woman. Right? Like that's kind of like basic 101, I think, right? Like, and so we have to understand that part of loving communication is interpreting myself and translating myself into a way that my wife can actually receive what I want to say right now, right? That I have to think about, like with Emily, if I'm trying to communicate something to her, like I avoid all my big theological things because she's like, I don't got time for that crap. I got 3 kids. Give it to me straight, right? And I got to know that, right? I got to figure this thing out. Like if she's come and talk to me, and like I tend to kind of get lost in my thoughts. Like I know this is probably a big surprise, but I'm an internal processor. And I have to think about this on the inside. And so she'll talk to me and I'll just be spaced out. But I'm not spaced out. I'm processing what she's saying. But if I don't choose to say, babe, I'm thinking about that thing you just said, she assumes I'm ignoring her, right? So a good communicator in that way is saying, babe, I'm thinking about verbatim what you just said. Right? Like it's just trying to speak in a way that engages my spouse where they are at and choosing to use language that matters to them, that communicates to them, that they understand. Even if that means there's a little extra work that I have to think of, like almost building a vocabulary for my spouse. Right? Now, hopefully, as you grow over time, a lot of the older marriages in the room, probably you felt this, is eventually you begin speaking each other's language just by second nature. You begin learning each other out and you know what this does, and which also is bad because then you begin to weaponize that because now you know how to hurt them. So there is a sin component to that. But the point of good communication is I want to speak in a way that my wife is going to receive what I want to say. And then the last one and the most important one, which is annoying to me, is tone. Tone. Because in my younger, more immature days, I used to believe that this was stupid, right? Like, babe, you heard what I said. That's what I meant, right? And she's like, yeah, but your tone said I'm an idiot. No, that's not what I meant, right? Until my daughter showed up, and she began reacting to the tone that I had with my wife, and I was like, crap, maybe my wife is wiser than I thought, which is always a beautiful revelation to have, right? But here's the thing, right? And I've noticed this, and this is a piece of wisdom I think everyone could just hold on to, is that people hear tone before they understand language, right? So they'll interpret your tone and then interpret what you said. Instantly. It's automatic. It's an emotional thing, right? Which is why we all know you can go to like a puppy, right? And be like, you're so stupid, right? And then it reacts to it, right? Ever done that before? Admittedly, I have. Because if a dog is small enough to fit in my hand. It's not a dog, it's a rat. Does not determine, anyways. I got opinions on small dogs, okay? The point being, you can trick it with an emotional manipulation called tone, right? And the same is the powerfulness of actual real communication, is that if I say something to my wife, I can communicate I hate you while saying I love you, right? Based on my tone, right? Based on my tone, that I can communicate the opposite of my message just by how I do it. I can tell my wife that I think you're nothing and a waste of my time while being engaged in a conversation just by the tone of my voice. Yeah, okay, babe. Got you. Heard it. How is that loving? Or I have been accused of, in the past, as I mentioned, making Emily feel like an idiot because of the condescension, not in my words, but in my tone. Because I'm trying to make a point, because I'm being a bad communicator, right? This woman I chose to love, trust to raise kids with, I'm making her feel like she's stupid because I don't fix my filter. And some of us in the room today don't have a filter here. You just speak whatever you want. Like, how selfish can you be? Can we be? Can I be? If I'm going to choose to speak in a way that is inviting, right? Because then it becomes not just about tone, but posture, right? Like, ever been in a conversation with your spouse, and this is what you see? Like, do you think that says, I totally want to engage with you right now? I want to be intimate. I want to be united. No, it says the opposite. I could be sitting there, but I could literally be telling you, I'm not interested here. And that's what happens, is most of us will interpret the non-interest as a breaking of intimacy. Right? And then if I get the message over and over and over again, you're not interested in me, you're not interested in me, you're not interested, guess what begins to happen in my brain? I believe you're not interested in me. Right? And distance begins to happen. Right? And so spouses, the posture of communication should be, I look at you in the eyes, arms open, I want to receive, I'm inviting, I'm creating this space with my body that I want you here. Right? And the tonality of my voice. Because I want to communicate to my spouse that I love her. And even if I'm angry or wounded or upset, that this matters to me. And the problem is poor communicators don't want to be understood, they want to be heard. I'm going to say my piece. I'm going to let you know how I feel. I'm not going to consider how it's going to impact you. Right? The worst kind of communicators, and in marriage especially, call each other names. Like, if you call your spouse a name, derogatory name, not cute pet names like Honey Boo Boo and things like that, other ones, if that's what you call your spouse, bro, like, get a better name. Anyways, like, I don't want to name call you right now because that would be hypocritical of me. But to be a name caller in a relationship is just wildly childish. Like, who do you think you are to look at your spouse and just like derogatorily call them names like you're in middle school again? You chose to marry this person. They're your choice. They're a reflection of your wisdom. Right? Call them jerks and idiots and even worse language that I won't repeat on here, like something that happens in houses. Like, how dare you talk to the daughter of God like that, husband? You know the whole 1 Peter thing, honor your wife so your prayers will not be hindered? And then we'll go around calling her these words. Like if you call your spouse animal names and female dogs more than you do by her real name, you're an idiot. You just called me a name, Mike. It was appropriate. Like, that should never be the flavor of our house. That should never, like, I should never allow that kind of stuff to cross my lips as a lover of Jesus and a committed person to the spouse. And if you have, gentlemen, you can stop today and find grace. Today can be a day where we fresh start this thing. where wives, you can forgive. And we'll deal with forgiveness in a couple of weeks from now, and we can together move forward. The reason why this is so important, and I was debating whether I was going to talk about this, but I think I have enough time. I didn't start my timer, so I got all the time in the world. Is this last piece when it comes to tone and the words that we choose to say? I want to be very careful here, because the pain of poor communication in the marriage is that the enemy weaponizes that to the soul. And in a way that is not the same between husbands and wives. That, in fact, I would argue, based on what I believe is scripture and experience, is that the voice of a husband, the voice of a spouse, has a greater impact on the spirituality of a wife than the opposite direction. The reason why I say that is because if you are meant to be this head of the covenant, this higher responsibility, the one that God is going to do double take for your honor, then you begin setting a tone for the spiritual health of this covenant, of this house. And this came full force to me and my wife a few years ago, when before I was as mature as I am right now, which I got lots to go, friends. Like, I get to speak up here and tell you some good and bad things, but I got lots to figure out. But a few years ago, we were driving to a wedding, and no kids in the car, so we just time to chat. We had about an hour drive, and so we were just talking, and I was trying to be a good, spiritual leader and ask Emily, like, what's God speaking to you right now? What's going on in your life? And through the course of the conversation, I asked her, when you feel like God speaks to you, what does that sound like? It's a very charismatic question, I know. And she said, after thinking about it, he often sounds the way that you sound to me. Condescending, actually. And what began to happen over our relationship is I would speak and try to lead my wife. The enemy began to weaponize that against her soul and try to convince her that God talks to her like I do. And that was the day that I recognized the power of the husband's word, not just in marriage, but over the soul of my spouse. Husbands, God's daughter, in a very real way, you enter into a space of representation of God. The one like Christ, loving like Christ, dying like Christ, washing like Christ, Ephesians 5, that's what you enter into. If you're going to be a husband that enters into the place of what's meant to be Christ-likeness and then talk to her like she's nothing, like she's stupid, a waste of your time, you're giving the enemy of her soul, just giving him weapons. Here, hurt my wife, please. And it was the hardest thing to hear, I think, almost in my life, when she said that God in her mind had been warped because of how stupid I was. Your tone matters. Not just because it's good communication, because I don't want to give the enemy more weapons. He's got enough already. And so, wives in the room, if you have ever felt a similar thing to my wife, can you please forgive your husband today? And actually go to God and ask him to reform that inner voice, because it's not him. The Spirit of Jesus is sweet, convicting but gentle, meek and humble, a leader and bold, truthful but always gracious, unlike our spouses sometimes. See, the pain of a poor communication is that it can create wedges in a marriage, weapons to divide. It's not just bad skills of talking; it becomes warfare on a marriage. And I want to protect us and speak honest and real before you today, because guess what's in the balance? Your home. Like I want to get up here and speak all nice, cute little things when divorce is on the table for some of you. I don't want to play games. So we speak this way to elicit us to grace, to bring us to the point where we recognize that, yes, God actually wants to grow you into that husband, grow you into that wife. He wants to partner with you in that. In fact, God is so good at communication. Did you know that He wanted so much for you to know His love, to communicate His love? He literally incarnated as one of us. You know the incarnation is partly communication. God wanted us to recognize and understand the message of His love so great. He took on flesh, suffered as we suffered, died on the cross for us so we would recognize and understand the love of God. There is an incarnational nature to communication that must flow from a love we have received and not earned. Must flow from a grace that we could never deserve but have been given. And today, if you're in the room, I have 2 questions for you. Married or not, and Ben, you guys can come up. We should have enough time to end with a little bit of worship together. 2 questions, and it's this. Number 1 is, are you entitled? Just ask her that question. Am I entitled? And how do you know that? How often do you say thank you to people? Thank you to the store clerks. Thank you to your servers. Thank you to your Starbucks girl or guy. There's so many girls at Starbucks. I don't know why that is, right? It's just true, right? I went to Starbucks the other day, and Daniel, where's Daniel? At the back. He was the only guy working. There was 10 women, right? Which is great, and they did a great job. Well, he was one, funny, because he was one changing all the garbages. I thought that was funny. Anyways, it's funny, right? Just say thank you, right? Are you entitled? Are you entitled? I need to move. I realize that. Sorry, guys. And number 2, and if you're married, that's right. If you're married, can you start today by making thank you an actual discipline for your marriage? Right? An actual desire to look at your spouse every single day and say, hey, I think I could probably say thank you 10 times today. And then actually search out all the spaces to do that. Can you make that a discipline today? And number 2 is this. What is the flavor or the aroma of your communication? If you had to assess how you talk, what is that like? Just be honest between you and Jesus. Because as I mentioned, did you remember that He will hold you accountable for every idle word you have spoken today? We will stand before Him at the end of time. And part of that accountability structure, part of the responsibility of our life is He will say, what did you allow to cross your lips? Was it honoring, truthful, good, and holy? Was that or not? Right? And I will look before Him and say, Jesus, the answer is maybe 70-30. 30 good, 70 bad, if we're going to be honest. I'm getting better. I'm getting better. But I want us to get to this place where we recognize that our speech is meant to be an act of love. And I have a feeling in my heart that in some of the things I spoke of today, there is need of real deep repentance. Which is not some weird Christian word, by the way. It just means changing of the mind, changing of the heart, going the opposite direction. I'm going to stop doing that. I'm no longer going to call my wife those things. I'm going to say sorry more often. I'm going to say thank you more. And I want to call us as a church to a place of actual repentance. And if you're here today and you've never followed Jesus, I want you to know that Jesus actually wants not just to forgive you of those words and those evil things, but also free you from the wounds that caused them to happen. To bring life and healing. If you would trust Him with your life, He will give you life itself. Life is very full. The kingdom of God is not something that we are waiting for. It's here. He's moving. Heaven we can pray to come, and it's open to anyone who would come and trust Jesus today. If you're married and don't know Jesus, can I encourage you, the best decision you can make, not just for life, but for your spouse, is just to try Jesus for a bit. Allow Him to get a hold of your heart. Because He wants to build in you the kind of character that knows how to love a spouse well. It's His desire. So I want to pray for us. Would you just stand with me?